G'day, mate. 40 here. You wouldn't want me to start this show with a loaded gun in my pocket, would you? So let's talk about our world, the kind of world that Donald Trump sees. Foreign Affairs magazine, center-left publication, elite publications, got a thoughtful essay here about Donald Trump's world. So in the 2 decades following the end of the Cold War, right, globalism just got stronger and stronger. So from 1991 until about 2012, right, globalism got stronger, nationalism was held in check, and you had the rise of all these increasingly complex networks, complex systems, institutional, financial, technological, that seemed to completely overshadow the role of the individual in politics. So a lot of talk about the deep state, but what's the term for deep expertise? All right, the world requires more and more expertise, and it's expertise that is way beyond the capability of even smart college-educated people to comprehend. And so this kind of expertise poses a substantial threat to democracy, because most of the decisions that are made, that shape the government, that shape the world, are made by experts, and their decisions are largely hidden from us, and we wouldn't understand what they were saying even if they revealed it. And particularly in the nuclear age, since World War II, right, we've got extensive privilege to hide government operations from courts, from the general publics. All right, we got state secrets, and there are secrets of expertise. You can't let these secrets get out. And so this privilege to hide secrets, right, it's probably even more valuable than the suspension of habeas corpus. That only allows the president to detain specific individuals, going back to this excellent essay in the Minnesota Law Review from 2010 by 2 Yale professors. So we've got a broad state secrets privilege. It ensures immunity from scrutiny in a whole bunch of cases where the president may claim that national security requires complete judicial abstention, and he doesn't even have to provide evidence for this claim, because that might undermine the security that he is seeking to maintain. And there was really no Cuban Missile Crisis, all right? But what there was an opportunity for President John F. Kennedy to increase the Democratic Party's chances in the next election. So he, large part, created a crisis to enhance his own party's political standing. And yeah, deep expertise. All right, air traffic control systems. I mean, I just think about how helpless I feel when I take the car to the mechanic and I then have a clue what's going on. And it used to be like a grown-ass man, he could understand what was going on with the car. But now that cars are increasingly computerized, right, it's less and less certain that your ordinary handy bloke will be able to understand what's really going on with your car. And then we've got pharmaceuticals, we've got computers. How did you like your SMST today? I'm forgetting, what's SMST today? Is that I'm thinking about FAFO, F around and find out. Wasn't that what Donald Trump was talking about at the White House today when he was signing executive orders? FAFO. But deep state, well, we talk about deep state, but there's no deep expertise. But much of the world runs on expertise. And if it's not operating, then if you don't have the expertise, then you lose. But if you have people with the expertise, how do you regulate them? How do you hold them accountable? Think about that air traffic control problem that we saw in Chicago today. And have you guys seen Zero Day on Netflix? It's an incredibly timely show. It's all about power is shut down for 1 minute, and phones shut off. Everything electronic shuts off for 1 minute, and over 4,000 people die. And then they appoint a former president to lead an investigation, and he has basically unlimited power. Right? He doesn't need a subpoena. He doesn't need a warrant to break into your home, to arrest you, and to use extraordinary measures, including torture, because the safety of the country is at stake. And in many areas, the safety of the public and of the country is at stake. And the only people who know what's really going on are experts. And how on earth do you maintain some sense of holding them accountable. Okay, so starting about 2012, we've had a profound shift away from globalism, right? We have all sorts of charismatic individuals who've learned to harness the tools of this century, such as the internet, and they've revived the archetypes of the previous century: the strong leader, the great nation, the proud civilization. And you can argue that this shift first began in Russia in 2012. Vladimir Putin, right? He took Russia from a complete basket case in 1999, and he restored it to great power status. He is the most effective great power leader of the past 30 years. And then you had Xi Jinping in 2014 make it to the top of China, and his aims were like Putin's, but grander in scale because China was much more capable. Then in 2014, you had Narendra Modi, a man with vast aspirations for India, and he ascends to the prime minister's office, and he established Hindu nationalism as the country's dominant ideology. And that same year, right, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who just spent a decade as Turkey's hard-driving prime minister, became its president, and he transformed his country into an autocratic one-man show. Now, the most consequential moment probably occurred in 2016 when Donald Trump won the presidency of the United States, promising to make America great again and to put America first. Right, slogans that capture a populist, nationalist, anti-globalist spirit that was growing within America and within the West. And America was less and less inclined to be in forever wars and to take on the role of global policeman. So Trump was riding a global wave, but he was also such a substantial figure that he was also causing a global wave. And he had a new vision of the U.S. role in the world. And it didn't come from the original America First movement that peaked in the 1930s with Charles Lindbergh. All right, Donald Trump's worldview came from right-wing anti-communism of the 1950s. Now, elites and the media thought, oh, Trump loses in 2020 to Joe Biden. This is a restoration of globalism. But that's not what happened, all right? So it is Biden that represents the detour, not Trump, right? Trump and national greatness are now atop the global agenda, right? Strong leaders who don't particularly care for rule-based systems, alliances, or multinational forums, leaders dedicated to the once and the future glory of their nation, asserting a mystical mandate for their rule. It was the Lady of the Lake, right? Her hand clothed in this shining fabric. She gave me Excalibur, and by virtue of this tart in a pond, right, I have the right to rule you. So a lot of similarities between Putin, Trump, Erdogan, Narendra Modi, Xi Jinping, right? They are all speaking over the heads of the liberal, urban, cosmopolitan elite to regular people animated by a hunger for tradition, for greatness, and for a sense of national cohesion, social trust, and national greatness. So you might initially think, oh, this is the clash of civilizations that political scientist Samuel Huntington wrote about in the early 1990s. Samuel Huntington, by the way, he was a contributor to VDARE, the anti-immigration website, and he contributed money, he contributed expertise, he did a lot of things to get VDARE going. But we don't really have a clash of civilizations because civilizations don't have armies. All right. So Orthodox Russia is at war with Orthodox Ukraine, for example. We don't really have a clash of civilizations. What we do have is the rise of the nation state and less interest in a liberal international order. And so it was America that led the development of the international liberal order following the Cold War, because at the time America saw that as in its national interest. Now America sees a more nationalist approach to the world as in its national interest. So they're not nearly as on board with globalism and being the world's policeman, right? The idea of the West is not something that animates Donald Trump, even though some of his supporters will portray him as the bodyguard of the West. Right? European countries have relied on American leadership, and they've relied on American-led rules-based international order, and they have failed to provide for their own defense, and so they have very little organized hard power of their own in Europe. And their countries are led by weak people. Now, Trump is going to revise the international order. And this article refers to 3 books that are the real roots of Trumpism. Not so much that Trump read them, but that they created a milieu that Trump comes from. So the first book is Witness by the American journalist Whittaker Chambers, a former communist who broke with the Communist Party, became a conservative. And Witness came out in 1952, and he talked about liberals and their treachery. Then the next book that was influential for Trump's vision is James Burnham, the 1964 book Suicide of the West, where he blames American foreign policy elite for upholding principles that are internationalist and universal rather than local and national. So Burnham wanted a foreign policy built on nationalism, built on family, community, church, country, right? On that basis, on the basis of a specific national civilization, not global civilizations or Western civilization, the specific civilization of which I am a member. And then Burnham had an intellectual successor, a young journalist named Pat Buchanan. And so Pat Buchanan's 2002 book, The Death of the West, where he talks about poor whites and moving to the political right, and the global capitalist and the true conservative are Cain and Abel. So Buchanan had great skepticism with regard to the elites, and he says globalism will crash on the great barrier reef of patriotism. And it's the ethos of these 3 books that informs Donald Trump's worldview, right? I'm not saying that he read these books, but his worldview you can trace to these books. All right, so Trump and Putin and Xi and Modi and Erdogan, these 5 figures, they all dislike universalist internationalism, right? They appreciate foreign policy limits. They are first and foremost nationalists. They're not trying to change the world. Putin is not trying to Russify the Middle East. Xi is not trying to make Africa like China. Modi is not attempting to construct Hindu nationalism all around the world. Erdogan is not pushing Iran or the Arab world to be more like Turkey. And Trump is not particularly interested in making the rest of the world like America, right? He's got a sense of American exceptionalism that separates the United States from an intrinsically un-American outside world. So Trump is not constrained by religion and by culturally defined fault lines and civilizational fault lines, right? He prizes individual ties over governments. He prizes personal relationships over formal alliances, right? He got on poorly with German Chancellor Angela Merkel in his first term while treating Putin with respect. So if Samuel Huntington had lived to see this, he would have found it baffling that the countries that Trump dumps on the most are those that lie within the West. So under Joe Biden and under Barack Obama and George W. Bush, Russia and China had to cope with all this human rights pressure from Washington, right? That there were so many people in these administrations that were essentially pushing for regime change in Russia and China and wanting to move Russia and China in a liberal democratic direction, right? So there was strong preferences in Washington for political pluralism, civil liberties, American notions of liberalism, separation of powers. And so this was experienced by Russia and China as a threat of regime change. Now, Donald Trump is back in office. That pressure is gone, right? Donald Trump does not care about the form of the governments in Russia and China, right? He doesn't care about nation building. He's not looking to do regime change. And so this reduces tension. As long as countries feel unsafe, all right, it's harder to get anything done. Nothing good can happen when people feel unsafe. So because Donald Trump is not pushing regime change, it is easier for Trump to negotiate with China and Russia. So you can say the overall atmosphere is less fraught. So we have more room for diplomatic exchange. Right? You can have more give and take within the Beijing, Moscow, Washington triangle. You can have easier and more concessions on small points. You got more openness to negotiation. And you can have more confidence building measures in zones of war and contestation. So Trump is much more flexible. And if he can pull it off, all right, we could have big dividends. He's the least Wilsonian president since Woodrow Wilson because he has no use for overarching structures of international cooperation, such as the UN or the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Right? Trump is like the tech titans. All right, he approaches the globe with the mentality of a startup. All right, a company that's just forming, might be dissolved soon, but Trump is able to react quickly and creatively to the conditions of the moment. So Trump welcomes a world without stable structure, and he's willing to use American power alliances and economics to diffuse tension, minimize conflict, and create some baseline of cooperation if that aligns with America's best interests. And so these are some of the arguments why Donald Trump is very likely to leave the world a less war-ridden and a more stable place than what he inherited. Interesting show on Mark Halperin this morning.
There's a lack of oversight. I mean, some of it's not as nefarious as some people would argue. I mean, it's just there are bureaucrats that have been, because they've been there a long time, and there's not a ton of oversight, that sort of, run crazy with enforcement or coming up with new. I mean, so yes, I think the one thing like I said, my issue is.
Okay, this is a question in response. A person's asking, is there a deep state? And should we be concerned about rogue actors within intelligence agencies? And Sean Spicer, in an awkward manner here, is saying yes.
That there's some really bad people, but then there's just a lot of bureaucrats that think that they're empowered to do whatever they want and don't answer to anybody and aren't accountable.
Dan.
Well, I think most agencies are trying to do their job. Where the kind of spying apparatus really grew rapidly was after 9/11, and the country made a decision that we didn't know, what was out there. We felt like we were not, dots had not been connected, and that things had fallen through the cracks. And so money was pumped into the spying and security services. And look, even, we could talk all day about it, but the reason they looked into the Russia issue was the Russians were trying to interfere in the election. That's what started. Then the question became, was it coordinated? Was it solicited? And that's where kind of the politics of this exploded. But we would want our intelligence agencies to be looking to see how are people trying to interfere in our country, whether it's our politics, businesses, intellectual property, or whatnot. That's good. Like, that's why we have them, and why we kind of poke around overseas to try to protect this country. So I believe most bureaucrats do the right thing. They're good people. They work hard. Sometimes they do things that in retrospect we cringe at or get out of control? Absolutely. There is oversight. You don't hear about it because a lot of that happens behind closed doors. Like, literally, they are non-public hearings. Their budget is not public, and the hearings are private. In fact, they're in secure rooms where staff can't enter, cell phones can't enter. It's called the SCIF. It's in the basement of the U.S. Capitol. It is like going into Fort Knox if you walk by it. So I believe they try their best to keep us safe.
Yeah, Bennett, I'll take a position closer to Sean's. The bureaucracy of the intelligence agencies are like the other bureaucracies at HUD or energy or agriculture. They want to protect their turf. But there's three additional elements to the intelligence community. Number one, they have access to tools and to information that they can use to fight their bureaucratic battles that make them more dangerous. Number two, they are fierce. They are determined to protect their prerogatives in a way that is at least as fierce as any other department. And finally, they have the advantage of less scrutiny because they can always hide behind claims of national security, even for members of Congress, even for other parts of the executive branch. So I am deeply suspicious of them and deeply sympathetic to those who say there needs to be more oversight, there needs to be more regulation, there needs to be more transparency. Otherwise, I think they're a danger to civil liberties and to our democracy.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. I feel like that's kind of where I am. And it's like the oversight is like, I don't know how you guys feel. And I know it's like provocative and for show, but it's like whenever there's like an interesting oversight hearing, that's actually something that I care about and like want to get information, it's almost like it's not even oversight and it's more for like a 5-minute clip on YouTube or Twitter that, you know, they're not even asking like the real questions. They're just trying to like make a scene. So
Yes, sir.
It's a very, the one thing I'll just say to Mark's point, it's a very hard thing to have oversight of, because if you bring someone human intelligence or signal intelligence and say, here's what we want to do, it's hard to say, well, like, let's go talk to that individual, or let's go, it's, you have to take not just their word for it, but their analysis of it, right? So if I trust a human source in China that's telling me X, Y, and Z, and we saw this a little on the WMD world, but like at some point, I have to trust that you've vetted them, that you actually believe them to be correct. I mean, it's not the normal kind of thing where you can walk into somebody's job and say, show me that widget was actually put on the counter, and I look at it and I see it and I verify it and I go, okay, you're trusting these individuals, their analysis and their sources and their methods in a way that you can't go say, let me go talk to that person, or let me go look at it, because the nature of what they do is highly classified.
Yeah, Bennett, thank you for coming in, man. Come back regularly.
Yeah, great question.
Get your relatives on to tell some McConnell stories next time. bring them with you. All right, let's bring in two folks that are concerned. First of all, I was in a Green Bay diner yesterday. All they were talking about was how concerned they are about how upset Richard Haass is about remaking of Europe. People are very concerned about that.
In Green Bay, Wisconsin? Yeah.
Yes,
yeah.
They're very concerned. They said, I saw Haass on Morning Joe. He's very upset about, you know, the sensibilities of the Europeans are a little out of sorts. And the other thing they're very, very upset about is whether Elon Musk's emails are being returned. They're very concerned about that. Sarcasm aside, if the Democratic Party cannot score political points off of the number of veterans being fired, they should just fold up the tent.
They're starting to do it.
This is like the easiest thing in the world, because I can't tell you the number of Republicans who are upset about it, including Dan, your friend Jesse at Fox, like indiscriminately firing veterans who make up a very large percentage of the federal workforce. If the Democrats can make this an issue, again, fold up the tent. You know,
well, and that's, I mean, Mark just gave it away.
Sell the DNC building. Sorry, go ahead.
That to me is the funniest part about this, is I'm not looking to help out the other side, but there's so many blatantly obvious things in front of them, and they're like, let's focus on Elon's email.
Right.
So there's a misspelling in it. He didn't properly use the disciple after.
Well, the only thing, you know what though, guys, I disagree a little bit here, because poll after poll shows that Musk is not popular. So what they're doing, but hold on. It's not a one trick only. I agree with you, Mark. What the veterans issue goes to is this indiscriminate nature of what they're doing, right? Again, it's starting to look chaotic and unorganized. And now you're seeing the departments are firing at each other. Ignore it. No, you can't. No, yes, we are.
Dan, I got to disagree with you. There's two categories of things, okay? There's things where you can change the policy and embarrass them and make them look craven and like they don't have the values of America. And there's things you can do that they'll just laugh at and say, I can't believe they're wasting time. I don't care. There's nothing they can say or do regarding Musk himself, as unpopular as he might be, that's going to affect change. It's just not going to happen.
Well, you know what? We will see. I mean, again, to me, it's not either or, right? I would not stop talking about Musk. And I've been one to say, focus on what, not the how and the who. But I agree with you, Mark. I would totally focus on what.
Here's why I disagree with you that it's not either or. If as soon as Democrats talk about Musk, it's all the blue media will cover, because they're obsessed with covering it.
Yeah.
You know, have you seen a story in the New York Times about veterans who've been fired? I haven't.
In the last 24 hours, I bet you're going to see one in the next 24 hours, because it's populating up through the ecosystem, online, in progressive websites and conservative websites, and usually the dominant media follows that water flow.
You've got.
Okay, let's check out the chat. The Mighty Puck, thank you, $10 super chat with the blessings. Why is Luke sounding like a more boring and more coherent circa 2008 Moldbug these days? That's weird. Yeah, I am not someone who's a Curtis Yarvin Moldbug respecter. Wow, that $10 super chat cost $15 to my Apple Card. Yucks. Yeah, look, the watery tart threw a scimitar at me, and that's why I get to rule. I think that's a pretty good basis. I read Fukuyama's 2 books on political order. The first was great, the second was not. Fukuyama overall, just the fruit is not worth the squeeze. Cyberview just bought a 6-volume set of Apocalypse Explained by Emanuel Swedenborg from the 1890s. So I'm reading the new Michael Wolff book on Donald Trump. It's just out today. And Michael Wolff is often very good. So he's often very shoddy, sloppy, and you could say unethical with some of the facts. But his analysis is often incredibly sharp and unique. And he says that no one in Trump world talks about who Trump is having sex with. That talk died in the first year of Trump's administration, that he's aged out of sex. He's no longer a sexual being. He also talks about how nobody knows where Melania lives because Trump and Melania are not together very much. And yeah, there's just no speculation, even though Donald Trump loves to surround himself with attractive women, that his attorneys are often not very good, but at least they are good looking. But no one talks about him tapping any of the young women around him. So Trump has become post-sexual, and he's turned his predatory urges on the world and on the country from the liberal perspective. So as a good liberal, would you wish that Trump was occupied grabbing women by the pussy or by grabbing America and the world by the pussy? Just tremendously entertaining, hilarious book, the new Michael Wolff book, just dropped today. And I listened to my music through Amazon Music, and they have added this new service where you get a free Audible book every 30 days. Not to keep, but you can tap. You can tap a new Audible book. So today I just tapped the new Michael Wolff book, and just so much fun to walk around listening to Michael Wolff. I've been through probably 6 of his books. I was a regular weekly reader when he wrote a media column for New York Magazine. Okay, I'm enjoying this discussion here on how...
I think you will.
Again, if these guys are smart, there's a bunch of left-leaning groups out there, veterans groups out there,
Correct.
Iraq and Afghanistan, the vote vets that are
Seth Moulton. There's a bunch of people. Yep.
No, but my point is that's exactly, don't get them. Let other people do your bidding. Yeah. Let these organizations, because NBC News would run a story without acknowledging that they're a left-leaning group and say, of veterans groups rallied in Washington today to denounce the cuts of President Trump and the preferences that veterans get in hiring. Like they will easily, but no one is serving that up for them yet.
Yeah.
But if they make it about Seth Moulton, it's a congressman who was a vet. I mean, it's so.
No, I hear he used to, prior to Congress, run a veterans group. That's why I said his name. Like that's.
Yeah.
No, I get it.
Trump had 4 chiefs of staff in his first term, and all of them did their very, very best to manage the building. I've not read a single word about Susie Wiles and how she's managing Elon Musk. There's oblique references to it.
So can I take that up a notch? Because I thought about this last night. There hasn't been a single significant process story.
Correct.
Okay. So it's not just Susie. I mean, first of all, I will go back to your point, Mark. Susie gets the credit. So we'll lead with that. Leadership starts at the top. The idea that there is no Stephen Miller crapping on Caroline Leavitt, who's crapping on whatever, they are working as a team.
Correct.
I mean, honest to God, I will say this. I have said it publicly and I've said it privately now to some certain people. There's a jealousy factor in here because I look, I once in a while was on a plane this weekend or on Friday, and I will once in a while look back at photos from 2017, 2016, just to see what was going on. And a lot of times I screenshot things, stories, whatever, that I'll keep my photos just to remember a story that happened on a day. And I'm looking back through some of the stories in Politico that were unbelievably outrageously false and ridiculous, but just sort of pitting people against each other. Some true, many largely false. But there's not one single process story of significance.
Right.
I say that because there might be one. I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah.
Hitting groups against each other.
The exception is regular drumbeat of blind quote paragraphs about Musk, of people saying White House officials are upset at Musk. We've seen that almost daily now for 10 days.
Well,
in
it's been
one paper
reported that Wiles twice has met with, she hasn't confirmed it, but it has been reported she has twice met with Elon about better coordinating with the White House.
Correct. This is the one thing
Yep.
that's the exception, Sean, to your great point. But
Yeah,
for,
I mean,
for the most part, we haven't seen this. But
yeah.
but I'm curious to see, because we're getting to the point where the way Musk has been operating is probably not sustainable exactly like this. That's my sense from the Hill and from certain people in the administration, that yes, we want to get off to a fast start. Yes, everybody's still trying to figure out what they're doing. Yes, we're waiting for cabinet secretaries to be confirmed. But now you've got these cabinet secretaries in there, some of their deputies, there's confirmation hearings going on today. Like, some of this is about good government or what the right thing for the president is, but some of it is just pure territorial. And I think you saw that with some of these agency heads and cabinet secretaries who pushed back on the 5 things you did last week email. They're like, this is my department. I'll run this department. I'll work with the president about who's going to work here, not Elon Musk freelancing with no notification. So I do think we're entering a different phase, and I'll be curious to see how Susie and others manage it.
Mark, would you guys say, because you guys know her better than I do, but my sense is she moves in the shadows when she wants to execute something, meaning if Musk starts to become unpopular, is it more likely that the conservative ecosystem starts to blurt, kind of become somewhat critical? Like, is that how they try to get the note to him that, like, it's time for you to move on rather than confronting him?
It's all up to Trump as far as I'm concerned. All right, last topic. Sean, what is the future of MSNBC in the wake of what happened yesterday? Like, where are they headed?
So there's a bunch of questions within that, because I felt the whole thing to be weird in the last 24 hours. Like, they got rid of Joy Reid, but then they're basically like, we're talking to Eugene Daniels, who I got to imagine is pretty much, I don't really understand the difference between a Eugene Daniels and a Joy Reid.
Cheaper.
That's exactly
cheaper. Right, but then you're keeping Rachel Maddow to hang out. I mean, like, dude, I'll tell you what, if I can get $25 to work one day a week, she's getting $25 million to work one day a week and do like documentary consulting. I'm really not sure. I don't know that that's sustainable, but
well, she's not getting that deal again when it comes up.
Fine, but I don't know that MSNBC will be around to give it to her. I think that there is definitely a decline in, I mean, what I find fascinating is they're going to be spun off. And then what's that model look like? Is there enough advertising to sustain it? It's an unsustainable model to me. There's not enough viewers. They've lost advertising. They have a very bloated high. I mean, I think you're right. They're going to come in. Somebody told me yesterday, and I don't know if this is true or not, but like, they were like, the beauty of the ESPN Sports Center model was that you had a bunch of people telling you the news, but there wasn't one, like, there were, once in a while somebody would get above their britches and they get kind of cut. Right now they've got to figure out, like, they're going to bring in, I think, a lot of cheaper folks. They replaced Joy with like Michael Steele and Alicia Menendez. Like, it's just, we're going to bring in cheaper talent.
Simone Sanders, yep.
Simone Sanders, and just try to I guess that's the answer, until you get spun off and somebody buys you. But the question is, who buys you? And do the person that buys you buy into that model? And I just don't think it's sustainable. That's my thing. The thing that I will say is a tangential to this is that my addiction is still prevalent, that I have to watch most morning shows. I cannot believe, considering the environment that we're in now, how bad CNN is doubling down on that model of like going further and further to the far left. It blows my mind that after what's happening at MSNBC, CNN is following them down a very bad rabbit hole.
I'm amazed.
I don't know.
I still wonder if that's happening from the top or just like organically. Dan.
Yeah, I think MSNBC is going younger and cheaper, and they're going to try to go more progressive with former officials from government. So Jen Psaki, Simone Sanders, people who can get guests.
We had our, our snow event. So
beautiful.
Anyway, just a little bit of historical perspective vis-a-vis DOGE. I think, and I understand it's chaotic, it's messy, et cetera. And, if it doesn't work due to the chaos, that's not great. However, directionally, I think that what Trump and DOGE are trying to do is keep not only the promises that he made, in the campaign of 2024, but the promises that FDR made in the campaign of 1932. And I hear a quote from the platform, and Dan's smiling probably because he knows this. 1932, we advocate, 1, an immediate and drastic reduction of governmental expenditures by abolishing useless commissions and offices, consolidating departments and bureaus, and eliminating extravagance to accomplish a saving of not less than 25% of the cost of the federal government. 2, maintenance of the national credit by a federal budget annually balanced on the basis of accurate executive estimates within revenues. 3, a sound currency to be preserved at all hazards. We condemn 4, this will be my last one. We condemn 4, the open and covert resistance of administrative officials to every effort made by congressional committees to control the extravagant expenditures of the government. So, you know, I think
That's awesome. I didn't know that.
And that's a platform, you know, there's your new Democratic platform, Dan, if you want to really invent things. But I think Trump should come out and say, you know, not only did I steal these great Democrats away from the Democratic Party, RFK, you know, Tulsi, you know, not only am I, you know, releasing the JFK assassination files, I'm reinvigorating FDR's original vision, you know. And the fact is, I mean, you know, I think when you look, I mean, historically different points, you know, the New Deal certainly being one of them. And by the way, there's a good book called The New Deal's War on Civil Liberties, which, you know, is strikingly relevant to the Biden administration, especially, I think. But you know, mass surveillance, you know, going on there, suppression of you know, newspapers, et cetera. But I think that, you know, basically, you know, the river has jumped its banks a number of times, constitutionally speaking, in our history, but it's always been in the direction of expanding federal government.
Douglas, thank you. Dan, and then Sean.
I mean, look, Douglas, I did not know that about FDR. That's an awesome set of quotes. Bill Clinton, obviously, and Al Gore. Al Gore was in charge of it, targeting. Mark, what was the title?
Reinventing government.
Reinventing government. They did.
AKA Rigo. Yeah.
Okay. You know, they did make some cuts, and look, I agree with you. I mean, there's one of the big questions that Democrats ask is, how did we not think of this ourselves? And how, you know, have we been so blind to what is an obviously popular and necessary thing to do, which is to kind of be more efficient and audit spending? And so I agree with you. This is a smart play. I think in principle, Americans support this. You know, how this goes about is part of the question. And once you move beyond that, now it's going to get interesting. 88% of the federal budget is defense and Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. They haven't touched it yet. Not yet. However, you know, Trump is saying, oh, the US, Russia, and China should cut our defense expenditures by 50%. And that may sound very pipe dreamy, but I don't know if any of you guys listen to the All In podcast, you know, with the Silicon Valley masters of the universe who, you know, chat amongst themselves. But I mean, they were talking about, you know, some of the startups that they've invested in, or at least some of them in their little clique, I mean, are talking about, they were literally saying, you know, a couple weeks ago, like, yeah, we can bring down, I mean, we can modernize our defense and basically do it for half the price. You know, look, it's always been the case. I mean, we've talked about this before. The ultimate example is military defense contracting is not all sitting in one, you know, area. It is in congressional districts of congressional leaders. They will fight tooth and nail. That is not a Democratic thing. Most of them are in Republican districts.
Welcome to Waters World tonight.
All this administration is asking is for federal workers who live off of the American taxpayer's dime to send 5 bullet points. That is all we are asking for.
Only 5 bullet points, and the bureaucrats are already out of ammo. Tulsi Gabbard joins Primetime.
I'll be going to the hospital soon.
We can't let them deport the millions of families across this country. If you look at the food that's on your table, think about who picked it.
Crops or criminals? Democrats make their choice. Kristi Noem is here.
I've never seen a party as lost. I don't feel they represent me. I don't know what they stand for. I would call myself an independent at this point, and I've been a lifelong Democrat.
Democrats transition to independence.
These people are just idiots.
Plus,
if you could speak directly to Elon Musk, what would you say?
F off.
one last warning from Elon Musk, quote, "The standard for passing the test was to type some words and press send. Yet so many failed. Subject to the discretion of the president, they will be given another chance. Failure to respond a second time will result in termination." Bureaucrats in Washington are getting a second chance. If you haven't told DOGE what you did last week, you have until tonight.
It's somewhat voluntary, but it's also, if you don't answer, I guess you get fired. What it really is, do people exist? We have this massive government with millions of people, and nobody knows who's working for the government, who's not. So what they're doing is they're sending out a letter to everybody, and they're saying, what were the things you did last week? I guess they ask for 5. And if people are working, it's easy. I could tell you 5 things I did last week. I could tell you 5 things I did 6 weeks ago, right?
1 million workers sent in their bullet points. That's about half the federal government. So 1 million employees blew off Musk. It's been 72 hours for something that takes 5 minutes.
I could name 5 things, 5 bullets, in about 5 minutes of me coming into the office every day. If you struggle to do that for a week, there's no excuse for that. Now, you can have an extra day to answer it, but you better be able to answer it.
I gave the primetime staff 18 hours for their 5 bullets.
So that's Trump's attorney, Alina Habba, and she got to know Trump at Bedminster, the Trump golf course in New Jersey, and she would get very upset if anyone claimed that she got her position as a lawyer for Donald Trump because she looked good in a bikini hanging out at the pool at Bedminster. And when she started speaking out for Trump one day when she was all over the news, she was checking social media and said, man, all anyone's talking about are my tits. I should wear a different outfit. So she forgot to check a box in one of the lawsuits against Donald Trump where she could ask for a trial by jury. So it may not be the best attorney, but Trump likes how she looks on TV, and apparently she looks great in a bikini hanging out at Trump's Bedminster golf course, and that's how he discovered her.
And they all met the deadline. Here are some of my staff's accomplishments. Unjammed the printer after Johnny clogged it printing headshots. Transcribed 3 hours of Monica Lewinsky's podcast. Watched 4 hours of Iraqi Sesame Street. Got yelled at on the phone by James Carville. Booked America's heartthrob, Stephen Miller. Called 12 farmers who killed their chickens because Biden told them to. Skipped lunch 5 days in a row producing the monologue. Maha. It's demanding work at prime time, so after careful review, no one's getting doged. Although Johnny's 5 bullets were troubling, and I'll share those in the window. People are taking the bullet points seriously. The commissioner of the FCC said, I'll show you what I did last week. Watch.
All right, made it to the top with Hassan and his crew. They're swapping out the lighting system up here. Wonderful day with them. America's tower crews get the toughest jobs done. Super grateful for their work.
Yeah. Maybe you didn't climb a power line or ice some illegals, but you've got to send your boss something. If you don't respond, it means you did nothing. Or as Trump says, maybe you don't exist. Here's what one former federal worker says is an average day in the office.
80% of the work in government is done by 20% of the people. Our government is filled with the most incompetent and most lazy people and an occasional hard worker. And those hard workers are severely punished every time they outwork their colleagues.
Yeah, I remember that. There's some jobs where if you do too much work, right, you get in the bad books of your coworkers. So Eric Prince, right, of the private military company Blackwater, he proposed to Donald Trump for $25 billion. Right, we will carry out a mass deportation of illegals. Right, Trump allies circulate mass deportation plan calling for processing camps and a private citizen army. The group led by Blackwater veteran Eric Prince has close Trump ties. Right, so they'd use a network of processing camps on military bases, a private fleet of 100 planes, small army of private citizens empowered to make arrests. Right, it's a 26-page document that Trump's advisors received before the inauguration, carries a $25 billion price tag, and it recommends a range of aggressive tactics to rapidly deport 12 million people before the 2026 midterms. This is awesome. I love this. All right, this group is led by Prince, Bill Matthews, former chief operating officer for Blackwater. All right, this is fantastic. All right, deport 12 million people in 2 years. All right, would require the government to eject 500,000 illegal aliens per month. All right, no way the government is getting this done. So apparently top White House officials are talking to military contractors to secure more resources for the president's immigration crackdown. ICE's arrests have slowed over the past 2 weeks. There's a pressure campaign within the Trump White House to rapidly increase the president's deportation numbers. We've had a bunch of top immigration officials reassigned because they weren't getting this done. Steve Bannon, people want this done quickly. They understand the government is always very slow to do things. It is smart to start bidding out right now and getting a feel for what else outside companies and contractors can do. It's not clear if the president has seen the plan. right? I just think this is awesome, right? Let's just pay Eric Prince $25 billion to deport 12 million illegals, right? That would just be fantastic. I love it.
I use the word work very loosely. One employee spent his time remote working, running his own farm. One employee would come into the office, his start time would be 6:30, and he knew nobody would be there. And when I came in at 7:30 and I was the next person to come in, he was snoring at his desk every single morning. Another employee would take the government truck on an almost daily basis so that he could go out to lunch and then go and take a nap in his favorite park under a shady tree in the government truck.
And those people, they showed up at the office. Last week at the Small Business Administration, 80% of the workers were still working from home. Over the weekend, that flipped.
On Friday, it was like there were tumbleweeds blowing through the office. There were still tags left on desk chairs. And it was my first full day at the agency, and I was so excited to be able to meet people. And to not find anyone there was disappointing. To have 80% of the people back yesterday was amazing, to be able to shake hands. And what's happening is Americans are seeing that they have been paying for empty office buildings, for do-nothing bureaucrats. That ends now.
All they had to do was ask the bureaucrats to come back. It was so easy, even Biden could do it, but he didn't. Biden actually fired people who wanted to come into the office, the ones who wouldn't get vaxxed. For 4 years, Joe never tried to save the taxpayers' money. The CEO of JP Morgan says it's common sense.
The government's inefficient, not very competent, and it needs a lot of work. And so you and I, it's not just waste and fraud, it's outcomes. Why are we spending the money on these things? Are we getting what we deserve? You know, what should we change? So I think doing that needs to be done. I also, you have to understand that whenever you go to any big institution or the government, the bureaucracy pushes back on everything. And they will hear every little thing they're going to push back on. So you have to be strong if you're going to do it. It's not just about the deficit. It's about building the right policies, procedures, and the government we deserve.
DOGE has already saved you $65 billion. Big Balls just found $35 million for social and behavior change in Uganda. We can't change our behavior in America. Look at the airports. You think you're going to change behavior in Uganda? We're giving the Europeans $70 million for digital transformation. The Europeans are rich because they don't pay for their militaries. They rely on ours. We shouldn't be giving foreign aid.
Okay, let me get back to some other highlights. This is the morning meeting on how Prince.
So I think it's interesting that you bring. I was glad to hear you talk about FDR because I've played the clips from Obama and Clinton and Gore. It's just funny. I mean, again, I think this goes back to like so many other things. When you, it's how you present them, right? And I think that's where we talked about this earlier. That's the hit mostly on Elon, how he's handling it, how he's executing it, putting out emails and saying, you know, you'll be fired if this happens. There's general widespread agreement. I mean, Democrats literally every time I hear them come on TV say, we can all agree the federal government's bloated and inefficient. And my answer is, okay, well, you didn't do anything. But if we've already got them at hello and we can just maybe change the tactic and the marketing piece of it, if you will, then I think we can be much more successful. So that's the irony of this, is that I think that the only thing that's prohibiting, you know, this from being more successful is maybe being a little bit more surgical and marketing it better, because the American people are there. The examples that President Trump and his team have cited have been fantastic. So I get it. I mean, this is not a new thing. What I think is different is him actually executing on it. It's one thing to talk about the waste. It's another thing to get rid of it. And where I think that this administration is really starting to show is that we're actually just going to do it. But as I've used countless examples in the past, part of it is at some point, if you've acknowledged that there's a problem for decades and you've done nothing about it, you can't really criticize the guy who finally gets to the bottom of it. And that's the problem right now for people who are trying to criticize Trump, is that they've known about it, they were aware of it, they did nothing, and now it's hard to be like, okay, well, we just don't like how you're doing it. But I think the more that Republicans can cite, I mean, I know you were offering that up to Dan, but I think we can take it too, and just start saying, you know, as FDR said, as Clinton said, you know, I would think that would be smart.
Yeah, Douglas, thank you. Appreciate you coming in. Grateful to you.
We're going to see if the courts uphold this power, by the way. I mean, that's $1 million question hanging out there, is can the president choose not to spend what Congress has appropriated? It's an outstanding question.
Yeah. Bennett, welcome in. Tell folks who don't know where you are what's on your mind, please.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm in Washington, D.C., don't work in politics. And I grew up in politics, but this was the first election I voted in. So I'm 28, so I guess I skipped like 16, 20 in midterms.
Who did you vote for? Did you vote for Trump?
Yes, he did vote for Trump. All right, this is Halperin's afternoon show. That's Mark Caputo, reporter for Axios. This is someone who used to work for Jill Biden.
it's a business, and
talking about cable news.
I think that's where people get confused, where the lines get blurred. It used to be, at least on cable news, that the opinion pages were at night and in the morning. Those lines are just gone on most of the on the cable networks, at least. And you know, they have to decide. I mean, MSNBC, they're choosing to sort of double down on more personality activism. Activist journalism. I wasn't surprised. They've always known that their bread is buttered on the far left or on the left of center. Look, I think you see that with the replacements for Joy, right? They're not shy about their opinions and their biases, and they are not there to report the news. And I love Jen Psaki. I love Jen Psaki, but she's not there to be a journalist. She is there.
Do you love her? Do you love her more as a sister or as a daughter?
I love her because I love her as a friend.
Yeah, she's a very nice person. Mark Caputo, thoughts?
Jen Psaki's hiring by MSNBC was one of the many examples of how utterly broken the Acela media industrial complex is. For the first time in United States history, a sitting president seeking re-election had his press secretary go and work for a major media enterprise and anchor a show. And no one fucking said anything about how irregular, how newsworthy, how out of line that was. And we have hundreds, I've seen scores of media writers. And I know this because they've written about me when one of my private Instagram accounts leaked and I said something that was deemed too offensive by the chattering classes. Nevertheless, these people couldn't lift a finger to type a letter about how out of line, how irregular that was, and what it represented. So when we come to our current moment, Jen Psaki, MSNBC, represents a very particular inflection point, as does the Biden presidency and the way in which the press covered it, that leads us to where we are today.
Amen, brother. And let me put a sharper point on one thing you said. Of all the examples of liberal media bias denied by the people who run the big organizations, of all the examples, perhaps the most egregious is they hire media writers who are far, far left, as if they're covering the media fairly. If you're going to have a media writer whose job it is to hold the media account, you cannot hire people who hate Donald Trump. And their coverage isn't subtle. It's not like some of the New York Times coverage, for instance, where within the crevices of the paragraphs, you can see they're biased against Trump. They are full-on resistance writers. And that's why they write negative things about Mark Caputo and me, and why they did not touch this Jen Psaki story. It's batshit crazy for these organizations who claim to be serious news organizations to have as their media reporters leading members of the resistance, unapologetic and explicit, who to this day have not written about Joe Biden, the lack of coverage of Joe Biden's loss of mental acuity. To this day, they have not written about the biggest media story of all time. And instead, they're writing about Stephen Miller's demeanor in a cable news hit. Donald, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Mark.
I'm spending $500,000 a night putting. Oh my goodness, it's like a bloodbath. And you know what? They haven't learned a single thing. We saw them elect David Hogg, who wants to abolish ICE and the Second Amendment and defund the police. These are not policies that American people want, and they're just digging the holes deeper. And they elevated Malcolm Kenyatta, who lost 2 statewide races in Pennsylvania. So basically, everyone is failing upwards, and you have the same consultants shifting from one campaign to the next, never internalizing or reflecting upon their multi-billion-dollar disasters. And I've been hammering away for months, demanding some measure of accountability as to how they wasted $2.5 billion on celebrities and 5-star hotels and spending $500,000 a night putting Kamala Harris's face on a sphere in Las Vegas. So these people are clowns, and honestly, they haven't learned a single thing. And good riddance. I'm so glad I'm no longer part of that clown show.
The sphere is really cool, though. I will say that, but not $500,000 a night. But Lindy, I want to stick with you on this. I mean, obviously, it's been 4 months now since the election took place. Obviously, Democrats had a really bad night. But it seems to me since then they haven't moved on. They are literally repeating the same messaging that didn't work. Threats to democracy, dictators. I mean, are they going to change message in times for the midterms?
You know what? I brought this issue up with the DNC chair, Jamie Harrison. You know what he did in response? He tweeted GIFs at me. and called me a narcissist for raising questions about his leadership, about how, you know, what happened to the infrastructure that was supposed to turn out the vote. They were hemorrhaging votes across the country. The entire country shifted red. And you know what they're doing instead? They're blaming racism and sexism instead of looking internally, looking at themselves and what they did wrong. They're blaming the American people. They're vilifying the American people. And how do you really think that sort of behavior is going to make American voters come around? And Jamie Harrison, I want to say one thing. He's doubling down on identity politics that American people have said time and time again, we do not want. We don't want this divisive DEI woke nonsense. We're done with that. But you know what? They're still going down that path. And they're digging their own grave.
And you know, proof of the point you just made.
All right, that's Lindy Lee, former big Democratic donor and strategist who's now on board with Team MAGA. So I just love this book, just essay, published in Minnesota Law Review, Constitutional Dictatorship, just how it points things out that as government gets bigger, obviously it's more and more difficult for the president to effectively control the discretionary decisions made often by, we've got about 50 independent federal government agencies like EPA. Now Trump's trying to bring them to heel. This essay was published in 2010. So we've got all these independent federal agencies. We've got all these civil service protections, right? And they prevent the president from firing people who exercise discretion against his will. And we've got all these claims of national security, all right, where things are just increasingly hidden from us. So we've got the politics of emergency. The president often defines reality. How many millions of Americans really believe that we're in a war on terror? Right? I suspect that, I don't know, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 million Americans really believe that from 2001 until about 2006, when Americans stopped believing President George W. Bush, tens of millions of Americans believed that we were really in a war against terror. And there was never a war on terror. It's like having a war on faxes. All right, terror was just a method. It was just one strategy. So yeah, the president has a first mover advantage to try to define reality. But if it doesn't accord with reality, eventually people will wise up. And there's ever more disconnection between the politics that we see and the things that the government does that we know about and what's really going on. Right? The actual practice of government tends to be faceless, tends to be carried out by anonymous institutions and individuals. That's why these first few days, first month under Trump is so unusual, because usually the most important things in government are done behind the scenes. We don't know who's doing them. We don't even know which institution is doing them. All right, we've got all this expertise that it's hard to handle, it's hard to hold to account because we can't even understand it. We've got tremendous secrecy. We've got government bureaucrats who are largely immune from lawsuits, from judicial review, from the executive and from the legislative branch, right? So our bureaucracy is largely immune from the three branches of government, the judiciary, the executive, and the legislature. And no major advanced economy has found any solution to this. This is the first time in an advanced economy that we see an executive, a president, seeming to make some wins against the powers of the civil service and the bureaucracy. Okay. A little bit more here from Jesse.
Senator didn't say jack. Everyone defending the pork looks guilty.
If you could speak directly to Elon Musk, what would you say?
Jasmine Crockett, not to be confused with Davy, is angry the train is running out of gravy. To them, finding fraud is like firing shots at Fort Sumter.
You understand the scale of the threat, and you have ideas about how to interrupt what feels like something that we have not experienced since the Civil War in terms of the threat to our republic.
Well, it's certainly the case that we understand the scale of the threat. Our communities have been under siege, as you pointed out, since before the Civil War. I'm a direct descendant of those very communities, so we understand the struggle, the history.
Maybe this is like the Civil War, because Jon Stewart last night got wounded.
It would be embarrassing if it was a small drop in the bucket and that the American people didn't expect that we should negotiate for all their drugs because we've already paid for it with our subsidies. Come on! I'll be going to the hospitals.
And now the Democrats are getting caught staging protests. Last week, the media latched onto a few town hall protests in Republican districts. Run-of-the-mill Republican voters allegedly yelling at congressmen about DOGE. But according to the Free Beacon, these weren't run-of-the-mill Republicans. They were Democrat activists organized by Soros-funded groups. They were astroturfed to create fake blowback against big balls. A majority of the country loves them some DOGE.
Nearly every one of President Trump's policy initiatives are receiving strong majority support. And I have noted that in every briefing since Inauguration Day.
Okay, weight loss drugs. Any of you on Ozempic or the equivalent? All right, then they're changing the world as we know it. And they're even changing the economy. And they are just changing lives, because if you were to lose 20 pounds, you'd become a different person, right? We know ourselves by our patterns of bodily tension, but we also know ourselves in large part by our body. That we move through life, we interact with others, we think within our body. And you're going to think differently when you drop 50 pounds. You're going to move differently when you drop 50 pounds. Your interests in life will change when you drop 50 pounds. How you spend your money is going to change when you drop significant amounts of weight. This is perhaps the most thoughtful lifestyle piece I've read in weeks. Weight loss drugs aren't just slimming waist. They're shifting the economy. So Ozempic, Mounjaro, Wegovy may not be the light bulb, the jet plane, or the internet. Their impact is expected to be so significant it can shift GDP. And so a lot of people, when they lose weight, right, they substantially change, right? Their interests change. I mean, how they spend their time, how they spend their money changes. So do you know anyone on these drugs? So it's mainly a middle and upper class thing, right? You've got to have good health insurance to be able to afford these. So this is Chicago trial attorney John Drews, right? He earns a lot of money. He's always given himself a generous discretionary spending budget. He is divorced. He is an empty nester. And his purchase priorities used to be scotch, chocolates, pretzels, eating out, and beach resources. Then May 2022, following all these reports from celebrities and influencers about these blockbuster weight loss drugs, decided to go on one. Everything changed, right? He lost 25 pounds the first year, then 75 pounds the next year, and he didn't just feel like a different person. He was a different person. His food changed, his clothing changed, he started working out, his vacation habits changed, right? He used to spend $100,000 for fun, and now he still spends $100,000 for fun, but he spends it in an entirely new way. So there are 16 million Americans taking these GLP-1 weight loss drugs. And so their collective purchasing power is going to profoundly reshape our economy and our culture. Right? There's going to be less and less, there are going to be fewer middle and upper class people who are overweight, because everyone with good health insurance who's fat is going to take these drugs. So in England, you never see an upper class woman with bad legs, because the upper class women know that if you got bad legs, you hide them. You don't show them off. And so if you see someone dressed skimpy and there are rolls of fat, right, that's not someone who's upper class, right? That's someone who's lower class in England. But we're going to have some giant changes in our country, right? So we've got a chief economist at Goldman Sachs says that if 60 million take these medications by 2028, the GDP will boost by 1% or several trillion dollars. Right? Healthier people mean a healthier workforce, lower healthcare costs, and you'd also expect them to think more clearly and to be more productive and to behave in a more pro-social manner. Right? It's not just purchasing food. Right? people will spend much more time on fitness, on their Alexander technique lessons, right? They're going to hire personal trainers. They're going to have more sessions with a personal trainer. Right. So the Walmart CEO, he sees a pullback in the overall basket for food purchases. The high-end online clothing rental shop says that customers are choosing smaller sizes and more body-hugging styles. Right. Lifetime Inc. has launched a performance and longevity subscription program that includes doctors inside its fitness clubs who can prescribe these drugs when appropriate, metabolic blood testing, meetings with a dietitian, access to personal trainers. So people are going to take on a long-term 350-degree view of health and wellness that will begin when they start losing substantial weight on these medications. All right, so this guy's in a high-stress job. He works 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Didn't have a lot of room to focus on his health. He was 63, stood 5'11", he weighed nearly 300 pounds. And there were all sorts of things that he couldn't do with his kids because he would get tired too quickly and out of breath. I'm not the most aerobically fit person. I was getting together with friends, and they can't walk a mile without getting, they can't walk half a mile without getting out of breath. I'd have to slow down, their back hurts. People just start falling apart. And they start packing on the weight, particularly once you pass 40. So this particular trial attorney, he dropped about 25 pounds on Ozempic. Then he switched to Mounjaro, which he thinks is more potent because it targets 2 hormones rather than 1. And he wasn't putting much effort in. He was just less hungry. And then he decided to increase his fitness. And so the money that he saved on food went to paying for a personal trainer. So these days he's up at 4:30 a.m. and working out. Right, his eating habits have completely changed. All right, so he's no longer eating Hostess cupcakes, Doritos, and other ultra-processed food. Right, so now his eating is deliberate. He's putting the right kind of calories into his body rather than just taking food on whim. Typical breakfast now is 3 eggs, half cup of egg whites, overnight oats, blueberries, half a banana. For lunch, ground venison or ground bison and vegetables. Dinner, salmon, sweet potatoes, Brussels sprouts, broccoli. Snacks, yogurt, raspberries, walnuts, peanuts, macadamia nuts. Drinks, exclusively water, coffee, matcha. He mostly eats at home. And so he's a premium purchaser. And so he's like spending a lot of money bringing in like exotic foods that are healthy for him. So he orders venison and bison, high protein, lean red meat that he has flown in from Hawaii, right? $31 a pound versus $5 a pound for ground beef at a grocery store. He eats it every day of the week. He has 14% body fat. Now, wait, 10% body fat. The average American man has 28% body fat, right? This guy's been heavy his whole life. And now I've never had a 6-pack abs before. I can't have enough mirrors in my house now. How vain is that? Right, he's completely changed his clothing. Right, now he wants clothes that are fitted and stylish. He's reading a lot of books on longevity, on health, activity, medicine. He's hanging out with his kids more. Right. Previously, he would have argued for an all-inclusive resort where he didn't have to walk. Right. This time, he agreed to an adventure through national parks. Grand Canyon, Bryce, Zion. They hiked 77 miles in 8 days. Right. So people's lives are going to profoundly change.
76% of Americans support the DOGE-led efforts of a full-scale investigation to find and eliminate fraud and waste in government expenditures. Again, this is from a Harvard-Harris poll, a very legitimate pollster.
Maybe Democrats should just take some advice from the Ragin' Cajun. With no clear leader to voice our opposition and no control in any branch of government, it's time for Democrats to embark on the most daring political maneuver in the history of our party. Roll over and play dead. Former House Speaker K-Mac is here now. All right, K-Mac, what did you accomplish last week?
Last week, Very big, because my whole house had to get fixed. I actually did a speech with Rahm Emanuel, and my favorite part of doing the speech with Rahm Emanuel, we had done one before the election. I told the entire crowd that I was right, he was wrong, because I predicted all the right outcomes.
And he got paid.
And Elliot Blatt says that I am ignoring the side effects. The whole article is on the side effects, right? Elliot Blatt, I suspect, is highly suspicious because these drugs are not natural, but they're highly effective. And side effects are completely transformed lives for some people. People rejigger their priorities.
Well into six figures for the speech, so congratulations.
Nothing of your level.
Not my level. We'll have to see
and
about
I even
that.
know the name of my show.
I had Water's World only a few years ago, but
hey, everybody has a Biden moment.
We
I
didn't,
understand.
we didn't doge Water's World, I promise. The advice that they're giving Democrats, play dead. Do you think that's smart?
They want them to do something. When they say play dead, it says get up and do something. They're making all the wrong arguments. But what America has to do, and wake up to this, the whole reason why Elon sent these people an email, when we took the majority and just had the House, we passed a bill that ended COVID and then passed a bill that people had to come back for work. The Democrats in the Senate fought it. President Biden fought it. And you know why? Because all these people weren't working. What Elon is doing that he can see, when we send you an email, you haven't even opened it. I wished we hadn't told the press about this, right? Just send them an email and say, hey, what do you got going? When you go onto your app, don't you get second authentication? They have to send you a text, they send you a password to get in. These people don't even respond to a simple email, so they're not at work. They're supposed to be working from home. They're not opening their emails. Then do we need them? Because this is taxpayer money. This is hardworking taxpayer money. What's wrong with having accountability?
So you're
that
saying
should have been the test. They don't have to say they did 5 things. Did you open the email?
All right, so you're saying that if you give like a federal employee 3 days and he doesn't open an email from his boss in 3 days, he's not working, maybe he's in Mexico?
No, somebody could be out sick, somebody could be on vacation. I get that. But if you can check, Elon can check now for the last 3 months you haven't opened your email. And think about if you're working at the Department of Defense. You should be paying attention. I'll bet you, what if you're working on the border? What if you're doing something else? And you're not responding to a constituent. What about all this? People need a permit. People need something in the VA. People need the IRS to answer. If you're not answering it and you're not showing up at work, how do the constituents get the work done?
Are people double dipping? Are they working at Arby's and also working for the VA?
I don't know that they're double dipping because I think they get a good paycheck from the federal government if you don't have to show up and you're just sitting at home.
What if they're remote working from another job and remote working?
Look, there are a lot of people who remote work multiple jobs. Okay, this is an important lawsuit that has the potential to change America for the better. I am not a litigious person. Right? I don't promote boycotts. I don't promote lawsuits. This lawsuit, all right, it's on the side of the angels. All right, Washington Post. Her claim of anti-straight bias could upend discrimination law. This happens all the time, right? If you have a strong gay identity, you will be highly likely to have anti-straight bias. If there are social incentives, if there are business incentives, if there are communal incentives, if there are peer incentives for you to hire gay and not hire straight, particularly straight whites, then that happens, right? There are thousands of Americans who have not been hired or have been fired or denied promotion because they're straight, right? Look at how Caitlin Clark is just hammered and bullied and smashed in the WNBA, which nobody was paying any attention to until she joined, and she received so much opprobrium and physical assaults because she's an attractive, straight white girl. And nobody except for Steve Saylor calls out the anti-white, anti-straight bias that dominates the NBA, which is largely filled with lesbian thugs. And Caitlin Clark is worth billions to the WNBA. But you don't see Nike celebrating Caitlin Clark. Nike has the deal, the contract with Caitlin Clark to sell shoes, but they're not doing it, or they haven't done it yet, because they don't want to promote some straight white woman in a league that is dominantly anti-white and anti-straight, a league that is dominantly non-white lesbian thugs. And so maybe we'll get some redress. Right, her claim of anti-straight bias could upend discrimination law. Right, it's not only white people and straight people who are biased. Just as many gay people are biased as straight people. Just as many non-white people are biased as white people. Right, this is an incredibly important case. The Supreme Court will hear a case that could unleash a wave of workplace bias claims by whites, men, and people who are straight. Why do they say that this could unleash a wave of workplace bias claims? Because there's been a wave of discrimination against white people, against men, and against people who are straight. And finally, we're fighting back. Right? Marlene Ames, distraught in 2019. She was bumped from an administrative position at the state agency overseeing youth corrections. She was replaced by a gay man who was less qualified. She was demoted. Her pay was cut more than $40,000. Then she lost a management job she had applied for to a woman who had not sought the position initially, but the woman was gay, so she was promoted. Now, to the Washington Post, this is an unusual claim. She says the department was biased against straight people like her. Well, it is. All sorts of parts of America are biased against straight people, just as there are parts of America that are biased against gay people. Supreme Court will hear oral arguments Wednesday in her bid to revive her case, which was stymied in the lower courts because of past rulings that set a higher legal bar for men, straight people, and whites to prove bias in the workplace than for other groups. Right? That in and of itself shows bias. Right? Whites, men, straights, consistently discriminated against, and the courts have deliberately made it difficult for them to even have their cases heard. Well, maybe things will change. Maybe this is another vibe shift. Right? This case is being closely watched by corporations and employment lawyers, right? Many of whom expect the High Court's conservatives to side with Ames. She's 60, make it easier for members of majority groups to sue. Right? If she wins, the flood of reverse discrimination claims will be like nothing we have seen. Straight white people everywhere will start filing. And I'm not a litigious guy, but damn, this emotionally feels fantastic. Liberals worry that a ruling for Ames could chill workplace diversity. Right? Workplace diversity means discrimination against men, whites, and straights. Right? Could chill workplace diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Right? America First Legal, which is founded by Stephen Miller, asked the Supreme Court justices to side with Ames, argues that it's highly suspect in this age of hiring based on diversity, equity, and inclusion that majority groups face less discrimination on the job than minorities. Right? And Stephen Miller's group, God bless him, has filed dozens of complaints and lawsuits on behalf of white people in recent years targeting DEI. God bless Stephen Miller. God bless Stephen Miller. May he have a long, prosperous, and happy and influential life. The NAACP wants the court to rule against Ames, of course. And she's represented by a black attorney. So she started the Department of Youth Services in 2004. She worked her way up, and then her direct supervisor said that she should retire. All right, take a demotion or you'll be out of a job. Right, a 25-year-old protege of hers got her administrative job, someone who lacked minimum qualifications for the position, but he was gay. Right, the Los Angeles Fire Department has been run by a troika of lesbians and didn't exactly dazzle in the first day of the Los Angeles fires. Right, then her management job went to someone less qualified than her, who was not interested in the position. Right, but these two people are gay, as is her direct supervisor. Right. There are Jewish mafias, there are Italian mafias, there are gay mafias, right? The UC California system under lesbian Janet Reno was largely operated by a lesbian mafia. Much of Hollywood operates on the basis of a gay mafia. This should not be shocking, right? When gays have power, they will often discriminate in their own interests, just like any other group is likely to do. It's not that gays are worse, but most people prefer their own. And if gay is the thing, you'll be promoting gays.
Trump almost shed a tear in the Oval.
This is the Gulf of America. And if you look at that shoreline, look at that shoreline. Look, from Florida, well, most of it is, it's called America. And vast majority, like big numbers. So I'm just admiring it as I look at it. I'm getting teary-eyed, but I don't want you to say Trump broke down and started crying. No, how beautiful is that? Look at the shoreline. Look at that.
Well,
that's America.
Then the president gave a present to the press. Watch.
Give me all of them. Look. Yes. See that? Trump was right about everything. It just came in. Somebody sent, I said, this was sent in by a fan. I said, I think we should make some of them, right? But we were, pretty much. You want one?
I'll pass.
Are you allowed to take one?
No,
Because
not.
he'll consider it. I know him well. He's sort of a stiff.
So, question in the chat, what's Steve Saylor's perspective on The Brutalist? He thinks it's a terrible movie. Most of the reviews I've seen say it's a stupid and terrible movie. All right, very important story here. We may well see a Supreme Court ruling in her favor, which could unleash a tidal wave of white people, men, and straight people, right, suing for discrimination. Right, so this woman says in the summer of 29, her gay direct boss and other gay supervisors threw a party for a gay man on his 30th work anniversary, but of course they'd never do the same for Ames because she was straight. So she's saying there's this long-running scheme in this government department where her direct supervisor, the protege, and everyone else wants to kick her out because she's straight. And now a plaintiff can prove a job discrimination claim in federal court by offering direct evidence of bias or by building a circumstantial case, because discrimination is often hard to prove. So a judge ruled against Ames without a trial, saying she had not provided direct evidence of discrimination or proved background circumstances. The U.S. Court of Appeals affirmed the lower court's decision, but it seems unfair and difficult to gather the type of statistical evidence that would show an employer was biased against a majority group. So she has asked the Supreme Court to rule on whether majority group plaintiffs should have to meet the background circumstances bar. Her cause has received a diverse backing. The Biden administration opposed her. In 2023, the Supreme Court struck down affirmative action in college admissions. Right, legal experts say the court may see this lady's claims in the same light, that eliminating racial discrimination means eliminating all of it. So employers are closely monitoring the case as part of their risk assessment for pursuing diversity efforts in a legal and regulatory landscape that they now see as antagonistic. So if the Supreme Court rules in her favor, this will help the Trump administration as it hollows out affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion. Now, Hollywood is largely run by a gay mafia. In 1999 book, Tabloid Baby, Burt Kearns writes about a clash between his tabloid buddies and the head of Fox TV at the time, Barry Diller, and his gay mafia. To Barry Diller, the Aussies were unwashed, homophobic ruffians. Hollywood was a place where untold secrets unfolded in the back of limousines and behind the walls of cloistered mansions, where rubber sheets covered priceless bedspreads. The manly men from down under had little reverence for the pampered poobahs of the Hollywood gay mafia. They laughed at the Diller crowd and their fancy airs. They regarded Barry Diller and his young male executives to be gay, to be poofters, and Barry Diller hated them. So Current Affair planned to do a story claiming that homosexual Cary Grant was straight, and their ad read, "Cary Grant, no more fairy tales." Barry Diller phoned, "The word fairy makes my blood boil." So Spy Magazine published a Mark Ebner essay on the gay mafia in its June 1995 issue, and following that, Ebner was blackballed in Hollywood for 4 years. And whenever I'd ask him for a copy of that essay, he would demur. And we've got a tacky column here in the March 7, 2000 edition of New York Press. I don't exactly hang out with the scum like the Velvet Mafia, but I got first-hand information about how they operate. One of Europe's great directors of opera, stage, and screen gave a letter of introduction to an ex-assistant and a boyfriend addressed to a rich and well-known tycoon, member of the Velvet Mafia. I knew them, both are gay. As the assistant presented himself to the tycoon, he offered his CV and gave the director's regards. "Screw the regards and the CV. Let me see if you know how to blow me," came the answer. My friend fled in disgust. What bothers me is not the bestiality and arrogance of the Velvet Mafia. It's the message they send out through their movies. American Beauty, okay, which portrays a homophobic father who beats his son up when he suspects him to have a gay affair, and then becomes even more thrilled when it's later revealed that the homophobe is actually a repressed gay guy. So you have all these weekend-long drug orgies at which David Geffen and his powerful buddies would run a meat market, selecting young men for sex. So Paul Craig Roberts pointed out on the John Rocker case, Bud Selig, the baseball commissioner at the time, thinks that kids with purple hair, repeat felons, welfare moms, and homosexuals with AIDS are ethnicities. So in Hollywood, God, the family, patriotism, you might expect them to be sacrosanct, but usually it's the exact opposite. Criminals get a sympathetic portrayal. Cops get a negative portrayal. People who think that same-sex marriage is wrong are fascists. Businessmen are crooks. Drug takers are cool. But people who drink are fascist bullies.
Yeah, Brian, you're not a stiff. He's sort of a stiff guy. You know? He'll take other things, but not a free hand.
Trump gives and he taketh away. 47 just yanked security clearances from law firms that worked with Jack Smith.
This is a good one. Is everybody listening? Deranged Jack Smith. We're going to call it the Deranged Jack Smith signing or bill.
Mr. President, may I ask you a question about Europe? So long term, do you plan to maintain the number of U.S. troops?
Wait, I just want to savor this one, please. Who would like this pen?
I'll take it.
Hey, why don't you send it to Jack Smith? A deranged person.
Eric Holder's law firm worked with Jack Smith, so that means Obama's wingman just lost his clearance. And if you've got a problem with that, Trump doesn't want to hear it.
What do you say to people who worry that targeting an individual firm or individuals who aren't Jack Smith?
Excuse me, I've been targeted for 4 years, longer than that. Thank you, sir. So you don't tell me about targeting. I was the target of corrupt politicians for 4 years, and then 4 years after that. So don't talk to me about targeting.
Intel's been at war with Trump for a decade. Now the president's righting some wrongs. Fox News alert, according to the Washington Times, Kash Patel's FBI opening an investigation into James Comey. The Times reports that Comey launched an off-the-books honeypot operation against candidate Donald Trump. According to a whistleblower, he sent 2 female undercovers to infiltrate Trump's 2016 campaign and told them to act as honeypots, spies who use sex to get what they want. And the honeypots ingratiated themselves into the top ranks of the campaign. If true, that means the Obama administration was conducting multiple phony investigations into Trump without any evidence. The whistleblower says FBI employees were told to shut their mouth about the operation, and one of the agents was transferred to the CIA so she couldn't testify. This investigation into Comey isn't about revenge, it's about justice. Kash and Bongino are going to get answers. But Intel doesn't like being told what to do. When they saw Musk with the chainsaw doging foreign aid, they started leaking to CNN. If you doge us, there will be consequences. On the CIA's 7th floor, home to top leadership, some officers are also quietly discussing how mass firings and the buyouts already offered to staff risk creating a group of disgruntled former employees who might be motivated to take what they know to a foreign intelligence service. The CIA is telling CNN that if their funding gets cut, they're going to sell state secrets to Russia. Who the hell hired these Benedict Arnolds? The CIA is supposed to be filled with patriots, not sellouts. And the FBI is up to no good, too. Michael Schellenberger is reporting a source inside the FBI says the Bureau is destroying evidence. Now we know what their accomplishments were last week. Dear Elon, I wiped the servers cleaner than crooked. We only wish the NSA had shredded their secret sex chats. We told you how Intel officials were using government chat rooms to brag about their fetishes, kinks, and sex changes. Journalist Chris Rufo just uncovered more messages. Viewer warning. Creeps at the NSA were fantasizing about having hermaphrodite babies so they could raise them non-binary. They were also trashing conservatives like Ben Shapiro, calling them effing monsters. And after Pat Robertson died, CIA workers celebrated. Quote,
hey everybody, Brian
I was always
McClanahan
taught
here.
never to say anything about the dead unless it's good. He's dead. Good. The NSA was also caught bad-mouthing RFK, but they really don't like Tulsi. They say she's fervently anti-queer, a Russian agent, and in a MAGA cult. This is the deep state the media says is fake. They've been shrouded in bureaucracy forever, and we're shining a light on the infection and cleaning it out.
Okay, Brian McClanahan's got an video here. Trump's
addressing constitutional questions. So I have to go back to 1883 in the Pendleton Act and talk about that and give you some background as to what was happening here in 1883 and why we had this thing put into place. So a period after the war where there was some insistence that some Democrats were brought into the fold, or at least some Southerners. These were people that were thinking, we've gone 180 degrees in another direction. People complained in 1883 the president had too much control, but it only covered 10% of the federal workforce, so they were still fine with the president getting everything else. But what happened over time is that people decided that who wanted bigger and more bureaucracy, the president didn't need to have control of these people. However, in the 1880s, when you go back and look at how some of the what the president said about this, the Pendleton Act itself actually had all kinds of rules and regulations on what you could and could not do. One of the things, you couldn't be overly political, right? You couldn't be forced to do something for political reasons, but you couldn't take money. You couldn't do anything political. Now, we know that federal workers do this all the time. And when Grover Cleveland became president, he actually set out some rules. You had to be a U.S. citizen to be in the civil service, all these things. Civil Service Commission made recommendations in place. So we kept the massive bureaucracy in place. We kept all the things in place that he was doing that were supposedly to win the war, right? Win the war on poverty or the Depression, whatever it was, and win the war in Europe. And then Truman just came in and rearranged the deck chairs, and we kept this in place. So really no one alive today remembers what it was like before this. Even if you were old enough to remember World War II, and there are still some people alive in their 90s that could remember that. You really don't remember what it was like before that. I mean, if you were 18 in World War II, at the end of World War II, you're in your mid-90s now, so you might somewhat remember a time, but you really don't remember. This is the problem the Democrats have. They understand that they've given the keys to this to Trump, and he's just doing exactly what they would have done, or they did do themselves, at various times. Of course, the danger is that Trump's going to do this, and when he's out of office, if the Republicans don't win in 2028, then the Democrats are going to come in and put it back on steroids. They're just going to use the same powers. It is the danger of executive government. But I want to cover a post by Jeffrey Tucker. If you don't know Jeffrey Tucker, he worked for Ron Paul, and he's a libertarian. And he made a post about what Trump is doing and how unprecedented it is, and really how it's an opportunity that cannot be missed at this point. And this is something I've said on this show before. If the right doesn't capitalize on this now, they're never going to have another chance. If they don't dismantle everything Roosevelt created in the 12-plus years he was in office, Trump's got 4. This is why he's saying, how much time do I have left? There isn't a lot of time, and the Congress, as I'll talk about tomorrow, is going to create all kinds of obstacles to this. because the Congress is just completely stupid. The Republican Party is ridiculous. But Trump is looking at this as the vesting clause. All right, you created this monster. We created the bureaucracy. I have complete control over it. I'm going to fire as many people as I want. I'm going to gut the administrative state. It doesn't mean I can get rid of all of the, I mean, he's saying he's going to get rid of this, this, and this, and he's going to try, right? Trump is just going to say, forget it, I'm trying. I'm just going to abolish this thing, Department of Education, Department of this, whatever. He's just going to abolish all this stuff. Or he's going to make it so narrowly interpreted, like USAID. He's going to keep, a few hundred people on. And he's going to transfer other things around to other stuff. This is what Trump is going to do to try to gut the administrative state. He's going to make it lean and mean in his mind. And so that's the point, right? You cut out all the fat. And in his mind, I think what they're thinking, what I've seen, some estimates are, that if they just trim the fraud, the waste, the abuse, they would actually balance the budget. That the deficit in the United States is being driven by fraud, corruption, waste, and abuse. If you just gutted all that, it would solve the problem. Now, I don't necessarily believe that, but it's going to cut a lot of money. However, there's still a lot of money that's going to be coming from the Congress, and they're not interested in doing anything to trim spending. So how are we going to rectify these things and reconcile these two things? But I want to focus on this post from Jeffrey Tucker because he's 100% right in what he says about the situation. So this is a post from February 23rd. It's been viewed 1 million times. He says, I'm concerned that many people do not understand the historical and institutional context in which the DOGE labor reforms are unfolding. They look at this as if they are some random, chaotic, arbitrary, strange, and even cruel measures to impose on a devoted civil service. And that's how the left is portraying this, right? It's this is a situation where this is cruel. People are losing their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. He says the reality is very different, and I'm not even sure that Elon entirely understands this. For more than a century, even dating back to 1883, the civil service has grown and grown without check from the elected branch, either the presidency or the legislature. The bureaucracies have ballooned from a few to 450 or so. The bloat and absurdities have grown too. Now, I want to focus because he's saying from 1883, even in the 1880s, we didn't have a situation like we do now. This really ramps up at the turn of the 20th century, but in many ways with World War I and World War II. That's when you start seeing this thing go off the rails. But it's Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt, that gives us the modern bureaucracy. This is why Trump has said, and he said it a couple times, not exclusive, but he said, look, I'm going after the New Deal. Now, I could make a case that Trump, in his first term in particular, was a New Deal Democrat. And in some ways, he still is, but he's going after the New Deal. And I think he's doing it because he realizes that his entire administration, the first time, was undermined by the bureaucracy. It's this immovable thing that created all of the problems. But you go back to the 1880s and you look at what happened, and well-meaning people said, oh my gosh, we just had a presidential assassination. We got to change the form itself. Anytime you talk of reform, quote unquote, you're going to get something worse. Generally. I mean, this is what the reformists always want, something worse. Countless cabinet secretaries have come and gone, always with the intention of making a change, but leaving saddened, demoralized, outwitted, outgunned, and ultimately devoured. True. Now, he goes to Coolidge and Hoover, Nixon, Reagan, Clinton. He goes to these people because, again, you're looking at the 1920s. Coolidge was still dealing with an administrative state that was much smaller than what we would see. It's only after the 1930s when you have Nixon, Reagan, Clinton. Nixon expanded power of the central. I mean, Nixon came in and did all kinds of nightmarish things. Reagan? Come on. But you see the expansion of the administrative state. It's because of Franklin Roosevelt. I would take the Coolidge administrative state over anything else, but of course it was expanding. But again, Coolidge follows Wilson. World War I created the problem. Tucker says, no president has seriously taken on this problem because they simply did not know how. The unions are powerful. The intimidation from the deep institutional knowledge is overwhelming. The fear of the media has been powerful. And every single president comes to power vaguely feeling threatened by the intelligence agencies. The industries that have captured every single agency were also far too powerful to unseat or control. This is all true. Now think about those intelligence agencies created post-World War II. Created during World War II, but really then expanded out post-World War II by people like Harry Truman and Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower could see the problems with the administrative state, with the intelligence agencies. He could see the problem with what he called the military-industrial complex. But he was just as responsible for it as anybody else.
If Trump privatizes deportation,
but as Tucker says, it's
migrants
inertia.
Will get moved out immediately. But Democrats whine, who's going to pick our crops?
We can't let them deport the millions of families across this country who have been doing the work that keeps our economy going every day. If you look at the food that's on your table, think about who picked it. If you look at your homes, think about who built them.
First, Democrats say illegals aren't taking American jobs. Now they're claiming not a single job will get done without them. While Democrats cry about crops, cartels are coming up with ingenious schemes to smuggle drugs. Like this Colombian who was caught muling 10 grand of coke under his wig. The old cocaine wig. They found out he was trafficking and that he was bald. On the ground, left-wing activists in LA are sabotaging ICE raids.
We are training the members of the coalition to do these patrols. We've been doing the patrols for years in Los Angeles and San Diego, but yesterday we had more than 150 people combing through the streets of Los Angeles.
This combination of institutional inertia
early in the morning,
has blocked serious reform for a full century. No one has dared. No one has even had a theory or strategy about what to do about this problem. It had become so terrible that most people in politics have simply surrendered, like homeowners who know that there are rats in the basement and bats in the attic, but long ago gave up trying to fix the issue. This is true. Now, I think Trump had good intention his first time around. He just didn't know what to do. He hadn't seen how these people work yet. In some ways, the Biden administration was a blessing for the second Trump administration because he had time to think about what to do about these things. How could they take this out? How could they reform this massive bureaucracy that has become the fifth column in American politics? And the solution was to go in and just fire everybody. The email that was sent out, if you don't respond to the email, you're going to be fired. It's hilarious because, as they're saying, most people don't check the email. So some people will. And of course, you have all the stupid lefty LARPers out. Congressman Amy Klobuchar, here's my 5 things I'm responding. He didn't send the email to you, dummy. He did send it to all the bureaucracy out there. It's just stupid. I mean, the Democrats are embarrassing. And even some Democrats are starting to recognize this. They're embarrassing. They're embarrassed by their own people. And they should be. Because the public has decided that they actually like what Trump is doing in this way. And I know you're going to go onto websites and, Trump's approval ratings are down. We're going to worry about egg prices and all these. But really, at the end of the day, people don't, if they don't want to be ripped off. And if they see that they're getting ripped off constantly by the government, and the great fear from the left is that if all this stuff goes away and people don't see a whole lot of problem with it, well, they just lost all their power. You see, that's the issue. You go back to the 30s and Roosevelt's making all these cases. We got to do this, this, and this. What if all that stuff went away and nobody noticed? What would happen? He said, all this time, the American people have felt themselves ever more oppressed, weighed upon, taxed, and regulated, spied upon, browbeaten, and otherwise overwhelmed. Voting never made any difference because the politicians no longer controlled the system. The bureaucracies ruled all. And then he makes a very important point. The Biden years underscored this. We didn't even need a conscious president executive. We only needed a figurehead to pretend to be president, just like the Soviet premiers in the old days. The institutions ran everything, and the people controlled nothing. Yes. Biden, as I said, the Biden administration was a blessing because the emperor finally had no clothes. Everyone knew Biden was incapable of doing anything. He was an empty suit. We know Obama was running the show. We could all see it. Who's really in charge? Not Biden. A bunch of unelected bureaucrats. Or maybe Obama sitting in the basement of his house, which he said if he had an earpiece. He's running the bureaucracy behind the scenes. Biden's doing nothing. And everybody could see it for the first time. Everyone could see it. There's no one in charge. Except for all the bureaucracies. And they did whatever they wanted. And they ran the government. And everything looked bad. So Trump comes in and says, I'm going to gut all that. I'm going to run the show. Now, what would you rather have, I guess is the question that people have to pose. Was posed to them. Would you rather have a person that you elected, even if you didn't vote for that person, in charge? Or would you rather have a bunch of people that nobody knows who they are? Faceless, nameless bureaucrats. Could be your neighbor, could be somebody else. Would you rather have those people in charge? Now, in some ways, the bureaucracy is the dream of the socialists. Because the dream of the socialists is to not really have government, but you have government, right? It's everybody running things. It's just Joe next door or Sally down the street. They're running things. But you didn't vote for any of these people. And the socialists don't care if you vote or not. That doesn't matter. But the people are running things. Not a person, but the people. This is in their mind, that collectivization right there. It's there, right? All for one for all. It's democratic. This is when they say democracy is bureaucracy, it's hilarious, but that's really what they mean. You go back to Franklin Roosevelt. He makes statements like this in the 1940s, particularly when he's trying to conscript everybody into some type of job, whether it's in the army or something else. He's making statements like that. Democracy is bureaucracy. This is what they mean. This is why Franklin Roosevelt is so transformational, and why I'm covering in my next class at McClanahan Academy. So then Tucker says how to deal with this. Trump alone figured it out in his last term. He simply took charge of the agencies in a limited way. There were screams of horror and plots galore. They performed a long stream of clever schemes to destroy him and show him who is boss, which is not the democratically elected president, but the forces behind the scenes. You see, Trump, he kind of smoked him out a little bit. All right, I'm going to take control. Remember, he took away, through an executive order, some civil service protections, and people went nuts, and so they got rid of them. They still had power. So Trump was able to see it. Okay, well, how do we address this problem? How do we do it? How do we go in and clean these people out? 4 years gave him time to think about that. Watching Joe Biden, and gleefully, it's almost like a mirage. We had this Biden administration. It's like it didn't even exist now. The job of the president, goes the message from all the insiders, is to pretend to be in charge, but not actually do anything meaningful. Shut up, mug up, obey, and disturb nothing. Let the administrative state do its thing without oversight or disruption, and then you will get your honorary library and best-selling autobiography and go down in history as great. This is exactly what Biden wanted. It was a deal that was cut. It's what Biden wanted. He wanted his library, his autobiography. He just wanted to have president on his tombstone. All the dopey historians are already listing Biden as one of the greatest presidents ever. Why? Because it's the bureaucracy. I think Tucker points us out exactly right. That's all Biden ever wanted to be. President of the United States on his tombstone. He gets these emoluments. These are the things that he has. Slap on the back, good job, Joe. You get people going into office, going in middle class, and they come out multimillionaires because they figured out how to play the game. And that's the deal, right? Well, don't do anything. Go into Congress even. Don't rock the boat. We'll make you rich. That's why you do it. We'll make you rich and powerful if you just go along. And when you have a public that is so corrupted, the government's going to be so corrupted, right? And so the corruption we see reflects the corruption of American society. We are corrupted. But Trump, being the man that he is, who doesn't like it when people try to tear down his persona, his image. This is a threat to Trump and who he was. This is a personal attack, and he took it personally, and now he's going in and trying to clean it up. Trump refused the deal, and look what happened. 4 years have gone by, and Trump is back again, this time with a determination to slay the beast, one that he knows all too well. The efforts of DOGE and Make America Healthy Again and Make America Great Again are epic in scope, breaking a century of pathetic acquiescence toward the deep, middle, and shallow states, and at last using moral courage to confront the problem head on, come what may. Now again, the amount of money they saved is really insignificant over the long term. But it's something, it's a start. But Trump has come in like a wrecking ball. He wants to try to knock these people out. It's just a start. I think he does see that if they don't go in and really gut the problem, it's just going to come back up. If you don't cut out the cancer entirely, it's going to come back. I've heard people use analogies about, certain types of plants. If you just cut off the top, you don't get the roots. You got to pull it out by the root. You don't get the roots, weeds. They just keep coming back. So he's going to try to go to the root of all this. Just getting some. He's going to gut the administrative state. And if you can gut it and take care of it, it will never come back. Unless Congress, as we'll talk about tomorrow, stupidly does what they're doing right now, which is to keep it in place. You see, you've got two things working here. This is why if you have someone like, J.D. Vance or Ron DeSantis, somebody come in that's as interested in Trump and gutting the administrative state, it'll stay gone. But if they don't kill it, it'll come right back once a Democrat comes back into office. He says they are profoundly aware that they must act fast and with some degree of ferocity, even recklessness, else we will default back to the status quo of leaders who pretend to be in charge while the embedded system runs things behind the scenes. It has been this way for too long. It's been this way since the 1930s. Really, the last president to run the general government was Franklin Roosevelt. He's Louis XIV. Everyone else is just a pretender. Louis XIV knew how to run the French government. Nobody else could. The 15th, the 16th, that's why the 16th got his head chopped off. He didn't know how to do it. Everyone else is a pretender. Now, you can say that you've had, Truman, of course, Johnson, and some of these people that have been pretty aggressive, but they don't know how to run it like Franklin Roosevelt did. The voters this time have demanded change and mustered the faith to believe that change is possible. This is precisely what DOGE is attempting, to make good on a promise that for once the voters actually believed was credible. They simply must succeed. There must never be another chance. The way of failure is the path everyone knows the U.S. was on, toward economic stagnation, political sclerosis, and eventual irrelevance in the unfolding of the next stage of social evolution. Now, saying it must work, you also have to have some I mean, look, this is great, but it is a long war. And there has to be some kind of patience here. But still, I think that Tucker is right. It has to be fast and hard at this point, and you're going to have to gut it. And then you're going to have to, there are going to be potentially some disruptions, some issues that have to be addressed. But regardless, Trump is doing things because he saw how it worked. He was able to come in with a plan and take care of it. And if the administrative state is gutted, which has been around since the 1880s in a way that it's grown and grown and grown, if that's gutted, if that fifth column is gone, and we have the four-legged stool, which is the three branches of government and the states, you're going to see some things differently in the United States. I don't know where it's going, but Trump could be the most consequential president since Franklin Roosevelt, if all this happens. I said for a long time it was Obama. Obama certainly did change the direction of the United States. I mean, he led to Trump. But Trump is doing things that have not been done since Franklin Roosevelt. In terms of, Roosevelt built the executive very quickly. Trump is trying to tear it down very quickly. Nobody did that following Roosevelt. Nobody would even try. That's why I've said nobody living now has seen anything like this. Really. And, I mean, we've got 3 generations of people. So, anyways, really interesting.
Okay, that's Brian McClanahan, Trump's wrecking ball.